Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, respected viewers. Once again, we are back with our new episode of Beacon, where we bring to light specific socio-political issues. Today, we are going to discuss a social issue related to Muslims living in West. And our today's guest is Sheikh Farrukh Sakleshwar, who by qualification is also a medical doctor and has been studying in Islamic Seminary in Qom for over a decade. He visits globally to deliver lectures related to Islamic spirituality and inspiring people to follow true teachings of Islam. Last Muharram, Sheikh delivered a series of lectures in London where he proved that it's not permissible for Muslims to live in West. This sparked a debate with agreements, arguments, and disagreements. Today, we will discuss this issue and try to conclude if Muslims belonging or originating from Muslim countries should live in West or return back home. Thank you very much, sir, for coming here and joining us in the program. To start the conversation, the first point that comes in our minds is that during last Muharram, in one of your lectures in UK, you suggested that Muslims who have been living in non-Islamic countries, they should migrate and come back to their own Islamic countries as they cannot live in the land of Taghut. We have seen that there is an amendment in UK National Borders and Immigration Bill as well, whereby any person's nationality can be revoked without giving any notice or without giving any notification. Though many petitions have been signed to stop this bill, but the point to consider is that do you still consider it that it's disgraceful for Muslims to struggle to live in such countries where there is the rulers are Taghut, especially for the Muslims who have been coming from the countries like Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan even, and many other Asian Islamic countries?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you for inviting me. Inshallah, it will be of some help with the questions that you have. Inshallah, I can shed some light on these issues. In relation to the first question that you have mentioned, it had many aspects to it, and I will try my best to tackle each of these different parts of your question separately. Although I'm not saying it's binding for everyone to migrate, what I'm saying is when you live under the law of Taghut, which inshallah I'll mention and explain during our conversation, when you live there, there are many duties that come upon your shoulders. Automatically, when you decide, make the choice to stay or move to a land which is ruled by Taghut, a number of obligatory duties need to be accomplished. And if these are not accomplished, you would be sinning and you would be carrying out a lifestyle of sin. And this is my main worry. Living under the law of Taghut is not in the best interests for the individual, for their dunya, for their hereafter. And if one lives there comfortably, they are going to suffer in the hereafter. And therefore, my point during those lectures that you referred to was this, that if you do not meet your duties in those lands, you have to migrate. And that's what I was trying to put forward. Now, I can speak a lot here, but because of the nature of this interview, I know we are limited in time, but people can refer to those lectures themselves. But the point is this. With this, as you correctly said, amendment, because this piece of legislation was given more than 15 years ago. But recently, an amendment was added. And as you correctly said, it was that they won't provide you any notice and they will revoke your citizenship. Here, the first point which needs to be mentioned is that we shouldn't we should first realize that something is hurting the establishment when they give a statement like this. So we are doing something right when they reach a level that they feel they can just revoke anyone's citizenship without notice. It means those who are working for at least the Islamic cause, they are doing something right, and it is hurting them, it's worrying them. So we shouldn't be disappointed, we shouldn't worry. But the next part of your question was, do I think it's still disgraceful? In relation to the point that you said, that do I still think it is a matter of disgrace or dhillah and dishonor for one to live in these countries? Here, I don't want to give a judgment, but the point is that you look for yourself. Look at countries like Canada and Australia and America, what they did to the indigenous people, killing millions, usurping their lands, and the inheritors of those indigenous people or aborigines in Australia and the indigenous people in Canada or America, they still exist and they still have a claim to those lands. And so why would a Muslim, I ask any rational person, why would a Muslim want to migrate to a land that they know is usurped and that there are people who have a claim in relation to that land? Is that not a lifestyle of disgrace they have chosen for themselves? Sometimes they may not know, that's a different issue. They're ignorant. But sometimes they know that the land that they are purchasing, a building, a home for themselves, for their family, it's usurped. And it has the blood of millions behind it. Why would someone want to choose such a land to live? Or, for example, countries like the UK, they are paying millions and millions pounds of artillery to different regimes to kill our brothers and sisters in the Yemen, in Palestine, and other countries. Why would we want to go to such a land with such a government who is financing all this, and we are comfortable living in that land and paying taxes to that government? Isn't that disgraceful? Isn't that dishonorable? History one day will judge us and our children in such a manner, saying, how could my father move to X land of Taghut, move away from a Muslim country, like let's say Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, whatever, and move to X land of Taghut, UK, America, Canada, Australia, when they knew what they're doing to our brothers and sisters in the Yemen, in Palestine, in Pakistan, in Lebanon, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. Didn't they know that they are paying such an economy of Taghut? How could they do such a thing? Right now, we may be blinded by the worldly life, but history will judge very clearly. Look how we, for example, once upon a time, slavery in the West was looked at very normally. And they would treat slaves, and the whole notion of slavery was seen in a manner which they thought it was normal. But generations later, now, their descendants are very embarrassed. How could our forefathers do such a thing? How is such a thing acceptable? And so the same applies here. We're going to be judged. So if you want to stay in that land of Taghut, it has a lot of duties intertwined with it. If you don't meet those duties, why on earth would you want to continue in a lifestyle of sin, paying the Taghut more and more every day, taxes, non-taxes? And you know how this is going to be spent in the defense sector, in the education sector, when you're financing protocols and syllabi and school curriculum which is promoting values which are anti-Islamic. At the end of the day, either you want to protect your deen or not. It's very simple. My worry is, and what I'm seeing, this is a personal judgment, more than 99% of people who decide to remain in those countries, they give in and they compromise their religion. And as someone who is wearing such a clothing, I care for them. They have to know. But there are a few brothers and sisters who are fighting very hard. I'm not saying it's impossible. In some countries, it would seem it's useless to stay in such countries and promote certain values because you know it's not going to work. In other countries, there may be some room place for dedicating your services. That's a choice and everyone has to make for themselves. But all in all, we have to be very careful and see that if we want to live in such countries, there are going to be consequences. And that is my main worry, and that's why I said what I said in those Muharram lectures.
Right, sir. Sir, can you briefly give any references of Quranic verses that could support whatever you just said, that a Muslim should leave the place where the rulers are non-Muslims and he should come back to his own country where there is an Islamic government? Are there any Quranic verses that support this judgment or this suggestion?
Well, there are many. I shall mention two of them for you. Although, before I do, allow me to just clarify, I don't say that you should migrate to any Muslim country. MashaAllah, there are certain countries which the majority are Muslim, and they are labeled Muslim countries, but they are not true Muhammadan style Islamic governments that they are leading. So it's not any Muslim country you have to go to. There are ideals, some countries have priority than others. And inshallah, I'll speak more about that later. But in relation to the two verses, in chapter 5, verse 51, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. Allah is addressing the believers. A believer is someone whereby Tawheed, in addition to its knowledge, Tawheed has become incorporated into one's heart. Sometimes someone may have the knowledge of Islam and is born Muslim, but none of it has entered their hearts. They are Muslim, but they're not believers yet. Allah is saying to the believers, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, La tattakhidul yahuda wan nasara awliya. Don't take the Jews and the Christians as your guardians. Ba'duhum awliya or ba'd. Some are guardians of others. And then the verse comes with a very important formula. Allah says, وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Those who do submit to such guardians, i.e. Jews or Christians, they are going to be one of them. You're going to be one of them. What does that mean? It means in the hereafter, you will also be partially a Jew or a Christian. Why? because you submitted under the guardianship of a Jew or Christian, and therefore you will be resurrected as a Jew or Christian. Now, in the Quran, when it speaks of Jews, see, in the Quran it says there's only one religion, Islam. In the Quran, there's no mention of Judaism. There's no mention of Christianity. There's only mention of Jews and Christians. It never speaks of any Judaism because there is no religion but Islam. So the Judaism we see equals Islam plus a number of distortions. Christianity is Islam with a number of distortions. So if you submit under a guardianship of a Jew or a Christian, you're submitting under a distorted Islam. And if you do that, like someone who decides to live in the UK, you will be resurrected as a Jew or a Christian. I.e., because you submitted yourself to a distorted version of Islam, Christianity or Judaism. There are many Muslim countries today, because of the nature of their guardianship and government, they are also a distorted form of Islam. And even submitting under such a guardianship would be problematic. And then, so you're going to be one of them. You're going to be resurrected as a Christian, partially, albeit partially, or you're going to be resurrected as a Jew in the hereafter, and you're going to be surprised. But I was a Muslim. And then the verse continues, Inna Allaha la yahdil qawmat dhalimin. Allah doesn't guide the wrongdoing people. Who are the wrongdoing people? Those who submit themselves to a distorted Islam, a compromised Islam. So that's one Quranic verse. There are many, but I'll mention one other. When the inmates of hell are taken into hell and the angels see their condition, قَالُوا فِيمَ كُنْتُمْ. The angels will say, according to chapter 4, verse 97, the angels will say, what state is this that you have? Because of their horrific resurrection in the hereafter and them being positioned in hell, the angels see the reality of such people and say, good grief, what's happening? Why are you in such a state? قَالُوا فِيمَ كُنْتُمْ. Those people will then say, قَالُوا كُنَّا مُسْتَضْعَفِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. We were amongst the mustad'afin on earth. We were amongst the suppressed people on earth. What does mustad'afin mean? What does it mean to be suppressed? It means that your route to salvation, your path to perfection has been barred, has been inhibited, has been blocked. When your path to perfection has been blocked, you are suppressed. You are a mustad'af. Now, this is just an example. People who lived in America all their lives, with that lifestyle, compromising their religion, then they say to the angels, we were suppressed in America. We weren't allowed to progress on the path to perfection. We weren't allowed to do many things. If that's the case, we were mustad'af. And that's what these people will say to the angels in the hereafter. And then the angels will reply to them, according to this very verse, قَالُوا أَلَمْ تَكُنْ أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةً. Wasn't the earth spacious for you? This earth was very spacious. Did you have to live in Los Angeles, in London? You could have gone to at least North Dakota. If not, you could have gone to Tanzania. Kenya would have been better. If not, you could have gone to Pakistan. there was Lebanon, there was Iraq. Naturally, if you go to present-day Iran, that would be ideal. There are degrees. But why did you stay in Los Angeles? Wasn't the earth spacious for you? Then the verse continues, فَتُهَاجِرُوا فِيهَا, for you to migrate in the earth. Wasn't it spacious enough for you so you can migrate? So this won't be an excuse in the hereafter. This is my worry. This is our concern. You don't have to live in those countries.
Okay, sir, to talk about perfection, you just said that it's the purpose of a man's life to get perfection. Then it must be meant that perfection in every field of life. So a common argument specifically from a large Pakistani community is that the conditions here are not as favorable, and the conditions are very severe sometimes with respect to security and getting proper opportunities. In materialistically, if we talk about materialistic progress, then doesn't Islam prefer that you should live in a place where you have peace, where you get more opportunities to groom, to grow, to develop, and live a comfortable economic life as well?
Yes, so in the case of Pakistan, there are a lot of difficulties in different domains, as you have referred to, in security, economy, and so on and so forth. The first point is what I had alluded to before, that history will judge and say, oh, Mr. Pakistani or Mrs. Pakistani, who flew from Pakistan to America, to the UK, and participated and contributed and strengthened the economy of the UK, which leads to policies, this very UK, which goes against Pakistan, which is responsible for the shedding of a lot of blood in Pakistan. You see, the point is this, that in Pakistan, those who remain there and tolerate the difficulties with the economy, with security, by remaining there, they are strengthening, propagating, and they are a voice for true Mohammedan Islam. And in Pakistan, we don't have many of the issues that we're facing in the UK and in America, vis-a-vis financing the bloodshed of many Muslims. Here, but when they go to countries, yes, like the UK or America, they have better jobs, they have a better materialistic life, but spiritually they'll be resurrected as a Jew or a Christian because of submitting to the law of Taghut. Now here, if someone says, I don't care what happens to my hereafter, all I care about is the dunya. Yes, I will tell them, okay, go to America, go to UK, you will enjoy it there. But if someone cares for their hereafter, we're Muslims, we believe in a hereafter. If someone cares for their hereafter, then they would have to work for their hereafter too. Now, if you go to a country like the UK and be part of a system which is financing all this oppression in the Middle East and other parts of the world, you are now part of that. Your taxes are paying for that. The economy is being strengthened by Muslims, let's say 5 million Muslims in the UK. They are strengthening the UK. If all those Muslims were to move out tomorrow, the UK economy would become paralyzed. So look, that is not honorable to be part of such a system. So my advice is, in Pakistan, yes, there's no security, or the security is compromised. The economy is compromised. But at least your path to perfection, at least your path, your route to spiritual perfection, no one is stopping you. You can speak against oppression. You are free to speak. And no one will bar you in many aspects in regards to your spiritual salvation. And therefore, that would be a better option than to go to the UK. And therefore, to all Muslims who remain in Pakistan, it's a jihad in itself, and they are building their spiritual salvation, and it can't be compared to those who go to such lands of Taghut. And always remember that the way history will judge this is that how come my father, who was an engineer, who was a doctor, and so on and so forth, how could they decide to leave their brothers and sisters in Pakistan, go to a country of materialism, get drowned there, and contribute to their brothers and sisters back home and the bloodshed which is happening there?
Right, sir. As you just talk about spiritual progress, which is impossible in such countries, it's okay with if a common man, it's okay with the common man because he is not well aware about the religious or a not strong belief. He doesn't have a strong belief over the religious teachings. But sir, what about the religious scholars? There are so many religious scholars as well who have been living in such countries for so many years. And those even who are present in Pakistan, they're desperate to go in West. And even the scholars who are present there in different Western countries, they're also focusing on individual practices, practicing individually the teachings of Islam, and they never talk about having a complete collective system, Islamic system. So what about those religious scholars?
Yes, unfortunately, you are 100% correct. And with these scholars, it's even worse. Why? Because as you said, they are propagating a limited Islam, a distorted Islam. All prophets came with two messages: U'budullah wajtanibut taghut, serving Allah and going against the Taghut. All prophets came with this, and they were vocal in this regard. Now, when scholars want to move to the UK, want to move to the USA or other countries in Europe, and they have a longing or a yearning to go there, and when they do go there, it's a distorted Islam that they are propagating. This is a very serious worry, and I'll explain why. During the time of previous prophets, when they wanted to stop the Islamic cause of previous prophets, they would physically kill those prophets. But now, what the enemy is doing, when they want to put an end to the Islamic cause, they are very comfortable with scholars coming into those countries, scholars who are propagating a distorted Islam, scholars who are propagating a distorted Islam, an Islam which says, be silent before the Taghut. These people are doing exactly what the enemy would do with previous prophets, but they would physically kill the prophets. Here though, and by killing the prophets, they want to end the cause. Here though, they are propagating a distorted Islam, and as a result, they want to put an end to the true Muhammadan cause. You see, they're doing the same thing. And therefore, for these scholars, and although I'm no one to make such a statement, but now you've asked the question, propagating distorted Muhammadan Islam is on a par with and equal to, punishment-wise, to the killing of prophets in those previous eras. So I completely accept what you say, and allow me just to give you a story. About 2 months ago, we saw the demise of the late Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amoli. Many people from Europe and the USA had approached him. They were scientists, and they had begged him to come to America, to come to France and other countries and to live there so that he can teach many Islamic sciences at the universities in those countries. He replied, he said, "No, I can't come." Later, when his students asked him, "Why did you say no?" he said, "In Iran, I have been a congregational prayer leader all these years. What will those people who had prayed behind me, what would they say? How will they look at this?" And then he said, they will then say, "We had prayed behind an unjust leader." Look, referring to this reality that it is unjust to live in such countries. It's a very powerful statement, although I'm not saying it's impossible, but the severity of the situation I want to just put across. So if a scholar goes to such countries and they're not doing anything, or they're only propagating half of religion, I would ask them to rethink.
Right, sir. So we are very thankful to you for your insight and guidance on the subject. Here we would like to know what is the view of Wali Faqih, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, in capacity of leader about living in West?
Yes, in relation to our leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, I am not his representative. I am an ardent follower of his, and whatever he says, I listen to. I will give my interpretation of what his perspective may be on this issue. And I'm basing this on a recent speech he gave 1 or 2 weeks ago. He said that in relation to people who facilitate intellectuals in Iran, in science, in medicine, in different areas, those people who facilitate their migration to the West. He said these people are committing an act of betrayal, khiyanat. Okay, so there are certain people who are facilitating the youth here in Iran, intellectuals, professors, specialists in many fields, to go to the West. He said this is an act of betrayal. That's it. Now, I want to now read behind the lines with your permission. I may be wrong, there's no problem. But if someone who facilitates a specialist's migration to the West is committing an act of betrayal, isn't that migration to the West by that individual specialist, even if there was no facilitation, wouldn't that be an act of betrayal too? Of course it would. It's an act of betrayal. You lived in an Islamic country. Now it may be truly Islamic or to some degree, like in Pakistan. Pakistan, I'm not saying it's a true Islamic government there, but to some degree, a lot of Islam is practiced there on a government scale. Here, you lived your life in Pakistan, you were educated in Pakistan. The money which contributed to your education was from the treasury. This also applies to Iran. People who are educated in universities, the money which contributed to their education was from the Islamic treasury. You're indebted to the Islamic treasury. The Islamic treasury built you with this knowledge that you have. And then you move to the West and serve Taghuti governments through your knowledge. Isn't that an act of betrayal? Of course it is. Now, there are exceptions. Someone may want to go there for 3 years or 5 years, learn something, then go back. But you have to go back. But if you just continue living there, in my very humble opinion, based on what Ayatollah Khamenei has said, this too is an act of betrayal.
Okay, sir, as you just said that Ayatollah Hassan Amili said that it's unjust, it is not just to live in West, and as you live in Qum, so you must be close to a lot of ulamas and maraji. So what is their opinion? Are they all on the same page, or do they say something, or do they have a different opinion?
Now, in relation to the religious authorities, their opinion is this, that your deen shouldn't be compromised. So, deen means u'budullah wajtanibut taghut. If you can go to the West and maintain these two, you're allowed. The Maraji will accept that. The worry is that you have to, though, maintain them. But if you are silent in the face of Taghut and you're giving taxes, which is participating in the spilling of bloodshed, and you're not compensating, of course the Maraji won't accept it. They will not accept it. They speak in very general terms. They say, if your deen is compromised, if you can't do ijtanibut taghut, if you can't do u'budullah, if you can't serve Allah. As you once mentioned, it's a collective message, Islam. Islam is more than just praying at home and what the ruling on gelatin is or other matters. It also has a socio-political aspect to it. If you can maintain all this in the West, so be it. But the West, it's difficult. Some countries more difficult than others. UK, it's extremely difficult. In the US, it's extremely difficult. At least go to somewhere which it's easier so that your deen is not compromised. I'll just give one example. We have, during the imposed war, there was a martyr called Shahid Chamran. Yes. And his wife saw Imam Khomeini. She was Lebanese. And she was living in Iran with Shahid Chamran. When her husband passed away or became martyred, she saw Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi. And of all the different advices that Imam Khomeini gave, he said, you stay here in Iran, you live here. And that's because of a principle we have in Islam, that when you live under a true Islamic government, under true Islamic guardianship, okay, you're not allowed then to decide to move out and live under a non-Islamic guardianship. Imam Khomeini could have given many different advices, but this is so important for one's salvation, he gave this advice.
But sir, one question that raises is, doesn't it mean to leave the ground empty? Because Allah has taken the responsibility to spread the way of Hidayah to each and every corner of the world. So what if the Muslims are restricted to one area, restricted and stick to their own country and their own boundaries? How is this promise going to be fulfilled that Islam one day it will spread and prevail to the whole world? So if Muslims are not making any efforts to spread this light of Islam to other people, because we have seen that Muslims, they went outside in last centuries as well, they went outside in other countries for the sake of business, but it was because of their nice behavior and their that got inspiration, other people got inspiration from their nice behavior and different teachings that they embraced Islam. So how do you see things in this perspective?
So that's a good point. And as I said, we're not against going there. The problem is maintaining your religion. And part of that is wajtanibut taghut. That's my point. When you go there, you have to fight against the taghut. You have to distance yourself from the taghut. And in previous centuries, as you mentioned, They would present and preserve their Islam, true Muhammadan Islam. And that would be okay. That's why there are exceptions for people who can go there. For example, true scholars who are propagating the message. That is something of value. But that's not the reality of what we're seeing, though. Today, the world is much more complicated than 1400 years ago. Today, in all countries in the West, in the Western Hemisphere, so to speak, here, the very lifestyle is based on haram, is based on mortgages. It's based on mortgages which is on a par with riba and usury. And sometimes you can't live unless you undergo such haram practices. Why would someone opt for such a lifestyle? There's no need to. It's much more complicated these days. The forces of global arrogance have instilled, have installed, have positioned throughout the world economic mechanisms where if you go there, you'll fall and become drowned in it. Haram practices. It was easier in previous centuries. Today it's more difficult. However, still there are exceptions. There are groups of people who still have to go, and that's a different responsibility. Yes.
Right, sir. As you just said that there are exceptional cases in this respect. So, okay, sir, if somebody is just agreeing, whatever is your suggestion regarding to leave your Western country and come back to Islamic country, if a mature person understands all these aspects and he decides to go back to an Islamic countries, but what if his children, they are not ready because they're well settled in West and they're not ready to leave all the comforts and luxuries and the opportunities they're getting in West. So what should such a person do?
Look, we're talking about Muslims and monotheists who believe in the hereafter. It depends how old their children are. If they are 0 to 7 years of age, children of that age haven't really acquired a significant level of rationality. There you take them. Don't worry. They will adapt. They will become used to that new environment very quickly. If the child is between 7 to 14 years of age, we have instructions that the relationship of the child with the parent is compared to a master and servant. Here, this is a very lengthy discussion in itself in relation to the spiritual upbringing of children. There are protocols Islam has given. During the second 7 years, contrary to the first 7 years, Islam has a different stance. The parents are the authority and the child has to listen. Even if they don't want to, the parent has the upper say and can force it, even if it's difficult for the child. However, so for the first 14 years, moving shouldn't be easy if you're a true parent. Should be easy, sorry. Now, yes. Now, in relation to the third 7 years, this is difficult because you're like two friends. You have to take advice from one another, the parent and the child. So here, the next criterion is this, that did you do everything necessary to bring up your child healthily, in a spiritual sense, in the first 14 years? Did you do your bit or not? You will either answer, yes, I did, or you will say, no, I failed. If you say, I've done my bit, I didn't compromise, whatever was my duty as a parent in the first 14 years, the responsibilities of the parent in the first 7 years and the second 7 years, I did most of what I was supposed to do. This child now, who is approaching adulthood, It's now he or she, they have to now decide for themselves. You can't stay in a haram lifestyle under a taghuti system because of them. You did your share responsibly. They're not going to listen anymore. Why should you burn for them? So you should still move away. Yes, you can help them from afar, but you yourself, there's no need to stay. But let's say no. You failed as a parent in the first 14 years. Here, the answer would be different. I wouldn't say move away, because now you've left a lost child in the bewilderment, total bewilderment, and just leaving them is going to make things worse. You have some extra duties, and that may entail you staying with that child. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O believers, once again in the Holy Quran. I'm not sure which verse this is, but it reads, Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Protect yourselves and your children, your family, from a fire. And then it speaks about the fire. Alayha malaikatun ghiladun shadad. And that angels will be monitoring all this harsh and very severe, in a very severe manner. Here you have to protect yourself and your family from fire. Now, living under a taghuti system, you're building your own hell. So, if someone is burning in fire, naturally, one would want to remove themselves from it. But now you have children too. You want to remove your children also. But in this last scenario I mentioned, you are responsible for the negative upbringing of this child. Here, you have to stay with the child and do your best so to maximally minimize the hell of what you have brought upon the child. And with Allah's help, maybe one day you will be graced and the two of you can flee from such a hell.
Thank you very much, sir. It was really a very fruitful conversation with you, and surely it will help our viewers as well to get a clearer insight of the concept of having a life in an Islamic countries rather than to prefer to live in a non-Islamic country. Thank you very much for your precious time. Thank you, sir, once again. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you very much. All the best, and I appreciate your time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Respected viewers, we hope you benefited a lot from the discussion today, and we can conclude that as per Sheikh, living in West for Muslims who have options to return back to Muslim countries is not permissible. Now it's up to Muslims living in West to think, ponder, and take the right decision, as it's a matter of hereafter and not just this world. We'll be back again with new topics in Beacon soon. Take care. Allah Hafiz.